Wouldn't you want to be high all the time without needing anything? That to me is the point of plant medicine, right? To learn from these plants, just like you learn from a coach, then you spend time integrating. Then when you've integrated and stabilized the last experience, you go back under the knife, so to speak. You have another experience and you're slowly stretching your awareness. And as you become more aware, you naturally become a little bit happier time and time again, because you start to get space from those stories, those beliefs, etc. And you start to realize they're not real.
Welcome to the New Age Sage podcast. My guest here today is Ryan Sprague, who is a cannabis coach who helps people use cannabis as a ways to heal themselves, like a psychedelic. So my intention of this episode is to first honor my bias in this exchange. And why I wanted to have this conversation is that I use cannabis in the most non-healing way possible from ages 19 to 21, just to numb and forget. And that made me think that weed is just this like bad drug that doesn't help anyone. So I've had that bias come in here. I want to basically check that and have an open mind and see. I've watched, doing research your podcast and have a very different perspective now that I hope people can have now. So I want to start there and then maybe go into you explaining how we can be used in this good, positive way to create healing as some kind of psychedelic medicine.
Definitely, dude. First of all, thank you so much for having me on, dude. It's amazing. I love your studio, dude. Like I was telling you, it's just so cool in here, man. Great vibes. And, for me, I tell everyone, and I like to start with this. By no means am I saying cannabis is for everyone in what I'm about to say today. By no means am I saying it's a cure-all, right? But that being said, this plant has been here interacting with human beings for over 10,000 years. And many people don't know this. And that's why I always say also, don't believe anything I say. Go research it for yourself. That's what I had to do to get red-pilled myself in this, right? To realize that the last 80 to 100 years of propaganda and stigmatization was, first of all, not accurate. And second of all, completely a farce to the real power of cannabis. And one of the things I speak about often is that now that cannabis is being legalized, I want people to think about why the government, right, why the powers that shouldn't be, would want a plant like cannabis that can increase awareness, lead to traumatic healing, resolution, and allow us to tap into our power. Why do they want that legal now, right? And this is one of the main reasons I teach consciously connecting with cannabis. Right? Having discipline, understanding your why, understanding intention, why you're doing it, what you're looking to get from it, and how you're going to utilize it. Because if you don't, then what's going to happen is, think about the mainstream media over the last, let's say 80 years, right? It starts with reefer madness, right? This plant is dangerous. It was renamed marijuana in the 30s by Andrew Mellon, Harry Anslinger, and William Randolph Hearst, who all had vested interests in nylon and other textile industries. So Andrew Mellon at the time ran the biggest journalism empire. And we know what the mainstream media is like today, even with the internet, right? How many people believe it? But imagine in the 30s, right? Where all you got was newspapers, right? You stayed in the same town your whole life, etc. Think about how easy it would be for someone to have a certain bias and then put it out into the mainstream and create fear. And also we know the negative polarity from the LAR1 feeds on fear, right? So at the end of the day, they got together and realized, wait a minute, we have a lot of shares in oil and nylon, etc., and this hemp plant is going to completely screw us over. So they invented this entire propaganda smear campaign called Reefer Madness, where literally, if anyone hasn't looked into Reefer Madness, what I'm about to say might shock you, but when you look into it, basically what they were saying was Mexican men were coming over the border and raping white women with this new plant that no one had ever heard about called marijuana. Because at this time, cannabis was a part of over 80% of all medications on the market. It was very normalized. So they went to Congress overnight and explained their case, like, hey, there's this new plant. And Congress was like, are you sure you don't want this to be voted on? And they were like, did you just hear us? People are getting raped, right? We need to make this illegal immediately. So overnight, they banned it. And in the morning, all these doctors woke up and were like, wait a minute, they banned what? And so that started this whole smear campaign. Then the war on drugs happened. This is your brain on drugs, all these things. And at the same time, the only media we would see around cannabis would be like Cheech and Chong, or more recently, Pineapple Express, or Harold and Kumar Go to White Castle. And so I want people to imagine what they've been programmed with cannabis being.
That was my education, Harold and Kumar.
Exactly, dude. It's like this dumb thing that's stupid. It makes burgers taste better, it makes you giggle. And again, like those things can be things that cannabis does, but that's like not even an appetizer. That is like a morsel of what cannabis really is. And that's why I love talking about the past 10,000 years of recorded historical and spiritual use. There's a cannabis historian named Chris Bennett who's researched this, right? shows cannabis being in the Bible and basically a part of every occult and spiritual practice since the dawn of time. And at the same time, we have an endocannabinoid system in our bodies, which is the largest regulatory system in our body, the only one with two-way communication between mind and body. And so when we think about the fact that our endocannabinoid system creates endogenous cannabinoids, such as anandamide and 2-AG, which mimic perfectly what the phytocannabinoids, THC, CBD, etc., in the cannabis plant do, what are the chances that is by chance, right? Like the fact that the plant that we find perfectly interacts, like I want you to imagine a lock and key, right? These phytocannabinoids, THC, CBD, etc., they fit directly into the CB1 and CB2 receptor sites that the endogenous cannabinoids that are produced endogenously within us do. And so that is not by chance, right? And I want people to research this stuff and see for yourself the fact that we have co-evolved with this plant for millennia. It has been here so long. And if you look at even shamanistic cultures, they have a very different view of this plant. So it's a big red pill for a lot of people to swallow to realize that, again, it's not for everyone. I'm not saying you should need to do it. But at the end of the day, I don't care what anyone chooses to believe around cannabis, as long as it's what they believe and it's not something they're just parroting from what I just explained, right? Where that actually starts and reefer madness and all these things. Yeah. Pretty wild.
Yeah, it makes sense. Let's go down the rabbit hole now of how we can actually use the medicine to heal and how people have that mindset that I used to have that, weed is just this thing that numbs you out, makes you giggle, makes you forget your life. How can we actually use it as the opposite way to go in more and use it as some kind of mirror to witness what we have to heal in our psyches?
Yeah, this is a great question, man. So, one of the main things is that none of us ever got a user manual for this plant, right? No. Combined with that, the fact that it was illegal for most of us growing up, so we had to hide it, which breeds shame and guilt, etc. And then once again, the mainstream media was saying, oh, this is just a dumb thing, right? So it's no wonder why a lot of us are waking up to patterns of dysfunction within our relationship with cannabis. But what I talk about very often and what I want to articulate here is that your dysfunctional pattern with the plant is not the plant's fault. And that's one of the biggest thirst traps in humanity right now, is blaming external sources for our internal issues. Yeah. And so at the end of the day, we know that mental health right now is interesting, right, to say the least. We know that our health is backwards. We know our food's backwards, our medicine's backwards. Everything is backwards, right? So for most of us, we grew up with a lot of trauma, right? And a lot of different challenges, limiting beliefs, unconscious stories, etc. And if we don't understand the great power that comes along with cannabis, well, how do we tap into the real responsibility we need to be able to connect with it in a conscious and intentional fashion? And so what I tell everyone is, the biggest thing is having a foundational practice. In shamanistic cultures and in indigenous cultures and, spiritual cultures of the past, plant medicines weren't what you started with, and I think today, because we don't have rites of passage, because again, everything's backwards, I think a lot of us find plant medicine because we're looking for something deeper. We know there's more to this experience we call life, but we have no context for it, right? Maybe we were in a religion when we were younger, like Aaron or something, but, we feel like we're getting blocked somewhere. So we find these medicines and we find that in a lot of cases, they can give us something that benefits us, right? Maybe a really different perspective on reality, maybe a improved mood, maybe healthcare and things like that, a medical reason, etc. And what happens is, instead of realizing what indigenous cultures and shamanic societies have taught for thousands upon thousands of years, that all these plants are doing are tapping us into our innate power, right? But the difference is that when they tap us into these things, they are going past our limiting beliefs, our unconscious stories, etc. And one of the ways we do that is we're actually switching our brainwave state from beta waves into alpha and theta. So alpha are great for the flow state, but theta are really what I want to put a magnifying glass on here, because theta are what hypnosis practitioners utilize for hypnosis. And so if you know what to do with this state, you can actually reprogram your entire subconscious mind. And the reason you'd want to do that is because wouldn't you want to be high all the time without needing anything? Like that to me is the point of plant medicine, right? To learn from these plants, right? Just like you learn from a coach, then you spend time integrating. Then when you've integrated and stabilized the last experience, you go back under the knife, so to speak, you have another experience and you're slowly stretching your awareness, right? And as you become more aware, you naturally become a little bit happier, right? Time and time again, because you start to get space from those stories, those beliefs, etc. And you start to realize they're not real. And so as you're starting to get into the subconscious, you're able to actually reprogram these things and live a totally different life. And so the way in which I teach to do this, for anyone that wants to take something from this episode and make it very practical, is the number one first step. I have a 4-step process for this. The first step is to take a minimum of a 3-day break each week. And the reason for this is not just some random rule, right? I'm not a rules guy. It's just the idea of if you want to experience the psychedelic side of cannabis, which many people don't even think exists, right? Which is why I love doing Breathe with Cannabis, because they leave like, okay, I just experienced a new side of cannabis, but at the end of the day, if you want to experience a psychedelic side of cannabis, it requires having an endocannabinoid system that is not saturated from daily use, right? Now, again, if you're someone who's a medical patient and things like that, you're utilizing the plant consciously, you know why you're doing it. I'm not saying daily use is objectively bad, right? When I talk about daily use, I'm talking about people like you were talking about, like I used to be, right? Just like, oh, my life sucks, but at least I can have this plant that makes me feel a little better. And then when, anxiety or paranoia come out, oh, cannabis did that to me. Cannabis made me lazy, right? Completely not taking ownership over our experience. And the fact that we and we alone put that pipe or joint to our mouth and made the decision to do that. So at the end of the day, if you're taking that 3-day break and then you're having your ceremony, which we'll get into in a second, the day you come back from that, you're going to have a much stronger experience. And also, how can you really tell what cannabis gives you if you're always connecting with it? Because now you've normalized it. You need that polarity shift to be able to understand the subtleties of what an experience gives you. That's why so many of my students, when I bring them into sobriety after a long time of connecting with cannabis, they're like, dude, I feel higher than I felt in years. I'm like, yeah, I know, man, because sobriety is a high too, right? And so being able to go back and forth between these pendulums allows you to get the most out of it. So take that 3-day break first, right? Second step is to create an intention before you go into the experience. And the basic idea or understanding of this is, how do you know what you're even looking to get if you're not consciously aware of it, right? And how is the plant supposed to co-create with you if it doesn't know what you want? It's not the plant's job to know what you want, right? Just like working with a coach, and that's why I love this analogy. If you start working with a coach, the first question they're going to ask you is, why are you reaching out to me? What do you need support with? And if you don't know, they're going to be like, well, are you sure you want to work with me? We can start to tackle some random stuff, but I don't know if this is really going to give you what you're looking for. And so, by creating intention, you also supply the masculine component of energy that equalizes the equation, because cannabis is a feminine medicine. So whatever gender we are, right, we need to supply that masculine aspect of intention setting, right? Taking all possibility and creating a line through it saying, this is why I'm here. And then the plant will give you that, but the way in which it will give you it will maybe be very different than the way you thought you'd get it. For instance, right, maybe you make an intention that you want to feel happier after you connect with this cannabis. Maybe you've been in a depressed state or something like that. And so maybe you expect the plant to just make you happier. But maybe what the plant does is, all right, well, the best way out is through. We're going to go directly into what is stopping you and prohibiting you from feeling happiness in your sober state of reality so that you can move through that, transcend it, and ultimately come back to happiness. And so again, if we can surrender in the experience and just set it and forget it like a crock pot, right? Set the intention and allow the plant to do what it's going to do. That's a huge component of this as well. Now, after you've set your intention, you've taken your 3-day break, you've set your intention, the third step is to create a ceremonial container. Now, I think when people hear ceremony, they picture white robes and, a lot of seriousness. And for me, that's not how I do ceremony. Not only that, but cannabis is not a serious plant. It demands respect, it demands reverence, but it does not want you to take it seriously, right? That's the human condition, right? Plant medicines can show you the hilarity of life, the hilariousness of the fact that we're on this rock floating through space, allegedly. We don't really know who we are. Like, all of that is hilarious, right? And kids understand that. They're just curious, like, why? They're not worried about knowing answers. But as we get adulterated, we start to think we need to know things, and we start getting piled higher and deeper with other people's views and things like that. So that ability of cannabis to alchemize through laughter is a big part of the experience. So when I say ceremony, what I'm talking about is a conscious and really like how do I put this? Like a very intentional container from which your intention can play out within. And what I mean by that is, let's say that you have a challenge with your romantic partner, right? And maybe you guys had an argument and you're taking some space and you're like, you know what? I'm aware that I must have a hand in this, even though my ego's telling me I'm not, but I know I must have some hand in this. So I need to get past the level of thinking that created this problem in order to figure out the solution. So you connect with some cannabis and you decide to go into ceremony. Well, in that scenario, a proper ceremonial container could be something like a room like this, right? Where you're quiet, you have a nice place to lay down, you have silence, right? To be able to hear the subtleties of what cannabis gives you. The wrong container for that, and I don't like to do duality, but a challenging container, let's say, would be to have that exact same issue and then go to a concert, right? And try to like have a ceremony in a concert. Now, on the other hand, though, let's say you have some friends visiting from town and you haven't seen them for a long time. Well, maybe a great ceremonial container would be a concert, right? You're all dancing, having fun, loving on each other, having a blast. So, the thing I want to say here is that I think a lot of people have this view of ceremony, like it's got to be this, like it's got to be in a certain area, it's got to be in an ashram, or it's got to be in a yurt. And that's just not how it has to happen. Sure, if you want it there, awesome. If that's what's fun for you, follow your fun. But at the same time, I don't believe in this whole like, oh, you can't have a spiritual experience at a concert because that's not a ceremony. I don't believe in that stuff. And so for me, I just tell people, be honest with yourself. What are you looking for? And what type of container will allow for that to manifest? So maybe you're meditating. Maybe you're doing breath work. Maybe you're taking a walk in nature. Maybe you're having a deep conversation with your romantic partner, right? Everyone works a little bit differently in how they communicate with the medicine and how the medicine works with them. So a little bit in the beginning is going to be trial and error, right? Starting to get to know this medicine. The same way that if you start going to the gym, you're going to have to figure out how to use the machines, right? Maybe you get a trainer, right? Just like what I do, right? With cannabis, who can teach you about, what strains, what methods, the endocannabinoid system, things like that. Also look into your unconscious stories or beliefs, see what potential patterns you already have running in your life of unconsciousness that could, lead over into your relationship with cannabis. But at the end of the day, there is going to be a little bit of trial and error, figuring out like, what is this medicine to me and how does it best work for me? So once you've taken your 3-day break, you've set your intention, you've gone through your ceremony, the fourth and most important step to connect with the plant medicine as a medicine and teacher and not just a substance, which again, no judgment, right? People want to use it as a substance, that's their own free will. But the fourth step is integration. Integration is really where the magic lies. Because like we were talking about earlier, it's where you can take a PEAK, peak experience, right? Whoa, I just experienced more love than ever. Oh my God, I'm so lucky to be alive. Oh my God, all these realizations and ideas that you get, and actually stabilize them in your life so that you can start having PEEK, peak experiences, which is where in your normal, sober state of reality, you start to experience the magic that you experience in the cannabis or plant medicine space. And that for me, I was talking to Aaron about this last night, like that for me is why I connect with plant medicines. I want to be high all the time. And I know that I don't need cannabis or anything else to do it, because what cannabis and all these things are doing is allowing us to tap into our own power as sovereign beings, as beings of God, right? As creators. And when you're on that high, just like a kid, you don't need anything, right? You're just happy. And then maybe something pops up, right? You try to work through it. You're like, I feel like I'm stuck. Okay, I'm going to go utilize this tool, connect with it intentionally, create a ceremony, get my idea, work to integrate it over the next week and be right back into it. So that's a 4-step process that anyone can take from this and put into action and start experimenting, right? Be your own scientist and start realizing like what strains work for me, what varieties, what ratios, 1-to-1, 2-to-1, et cetera, what methods of ingestion, et cetera. And the more that you do that, the more you'll start really forming a relationship with this plant. And it will start being a living entity in your life, not just something that you use and abuse when you can't figure out how to give yourself comfort. Yeah.
How do you know when the stuckness requires sober planning versus you going to cannabis?
Yeah, that's a great question too. So for me personally, and I can speak to my own experience. And
I asked that because it's like, I think the issue I faced as an addict, drug addict before was like, anytime I was stuck, I immediately went, I need this thing, right?
Yeah.
It's like, how do you avoid addiction at those points of stuckness? You know what I'm saying?
Definitely.
What's the intention there?
100%. So one thing I want to talk about too, since you brought up addiction, right, is for me in my own life, what I choose to believe personally, and I've suffered from certain types of addiction in my life. I have many family members who have and friends who have too. I grew up in Boston. The opiate epidemic there is fucking crazy, So what I'm about to say, I don't say lightly, and I'm not trying to trigger anyone or potentially invalidate anyone's experience with addiction. But this is what I've noticed in my own life, that at a certain point, I really believed I was addicted to cannabis, let's say, right? But what I realized was that I wasn't addicted to cannabis. I was just addicted to getting the feelings of comfort that I was feeling from the plant at that point. And I didn't know how to handle that on my own. So that's why I say that for me, the foundation is most important. what I will do is when I'm having a challenge, a trigger, etc., I will take some space, and sometimes I'll meditate, sometimes I'll do breath work, sometimes I'll take a walk, sometimes I'll play guitar, and I will pull out all the stops that I know of. And many times I can work through it no problem. But there's a certain feeling I get where it seems like I'm bumping up against maybe the edge of my comfort zone or something, like maybe it's like a big evolution I'm about to go through. And in that moment, I start to realize like, okay, I've tried all my things, I've exhausted everything I know, and it seems like I can't solve this problem from this level of thinking. That's when I'll actually commune with my soul and do kinesiology and start to ask my soul, like, I, Ryan Sprague, will benefit right now from connecting with cannabis for this issue. And I'll just test myself. And if I test strong, that tells me, okay, I will benefit from that. Sometimes though, I'll test low and I'm like, okay, so now what am I believing that's leading to the fact that I think I need cannabis for this, even though I'm clearly testing that I don't? So, one of the things I found is that even in those times where you feel like you need to go to cannabis, if you are consciously aware, right, and you're becoming more and more aware, you can actually learn a lot from that too, because maybe sometimes you're accurate, right? Your soul's like, hey, right now you're bumping up against a comfort zone and you would benefit from working with a coach or cannabis or things like that. Other times though, I start to realize like, why do I feel like I need this right now? Like if I'm feeling like I need this, but I'm clearly testing that I don't, then what's going on there? And that sometimes will create a whole new catalyzing journey, And so that for me is how I look at it, that I was never addicted to cannabis. Cannabis was not the problem in my life. It was actually my applied solution, right? I didn't know any other way to get to like my desired reality. So it was just my standing solution because I didn't have a better way. But once I actually started to realize that I was feeling discomfort within, like I was talking about before too, I was feeling very victim-y. I was feeling like I didn't, have the ability or the power to really actualize and really like bring my unique magic to the world and to my own life. That to the degree that I was in that victim mentality was the degree to which I thought I needed external things to fix me internally. So once I started realizing that I have everything I need internally, but sometimes just like a dinner table that you start throwing papers on and before you know it, you can't even eat there, right? Because it's just a mess of papers. At the end of the day, being able to realize that there's still a table underneath there, but maybe sometimes you just need some help getting the papers cleared off. Because sometimes the papers can get so thick on there that you forget there's a table there altogether. And that's part of the human experience. And that's really where I found psychedelics to be very beneficial, is sometimes I just don't know what I don't know. I mean, arguably, I would say I never know anything, right? Let alone what I don't know. And so these experiences are really like a stripping away of everything. Cannabis is a little bit different in the way it works unless you take a very high dose, where you're still attached to a lot of your humanness. And that's one of the reasons I love it so much, because it's very practical. For most people right now, they would love to go to the jungle and do ayahuasca potentially, or love to seek out mushrooms, but they don't know anyone, they can't afford it, they can't take time off of their family. And honestly, for most people, they're not gonna really understand how to utilize medicines like that. Again, like a lot of these centers do great at educating and things like that. But again, it takes a lot of foundation to really be able to utilize these medicines in a conscious way. And that's a lot of what we teach in the Conscious Cannabis Collective. My mastermind is like a lot of the foundation. I joke often that even though it's a cannabis mastermind and we'll teach you everything about cannabis, it's really not about cannabis at all. Because at the end of the day, we're connecting with a plant intentionally that increases our awareness. And whatever that awareness is, whether it's I'm in the wrong relationship, whether it's I want to start a podcast, whether it's I need to leave my job, that's the stuff we're really diving into. And that's what I put the focus on, because again, I think people get stuck in the weeds, pardon the pun, where they're like, well, how much THC does it have? How pretty does it look? And again, like I love those things. I love the differentiality between cannabis, but that stuff doesn't matter nearly as much as like, what intention are you creating? Are you creating ceremony? Are you working to integrate? And what is your ultimate why? Like, what are you looking to get from working with that medicine? So that's what I would say on that. Yeah.
I want to talk about moving beyond duality. What's like a problematic, what are the problematic ways weed is consumed on the, maybe like a chemistry level or biological level, where, I think the common experience, we live in places where it's legal, right? You go to a dispensary, you buy something with like 30% THC and some nice packaging, and you take it and you get super high or paranoid. What are kind of like the no-nos, like not no-nos, but like a problematic way that weed is consumed nowadays that most consumers are going about? And what's a better way to go about it for people who do smoke weed?
Yeah, I love talking about this because the world of cannabis today is so strange, man. Like the things people choose to care about. And again, if we look at the world in general, we're in a very scientific materialism reductionist mindset right? People don't really care about the plant. They want to break it down into individual components and try to isolate it and do chemical weird stuff, right? And again, I'm not saying that stuff is inherently bad, but I think man has this unconscious belief that we can outsmart nature, or that nature makes mistakes. And, there needs to be, or we require a humbling of sorts, right? And realizing that we're not going to improve on nature, right? At the end of the day, we're not going to. So at the end of the day, am I against doing isolates like THC isolate or CBD isolate? I wouldn't say I'm against them, but I would never utilize them in my own life. And so a couple of the things that we'll talk about are the fact that, for one part, people don't know what cannabis is. They have no idea that it's a plant medicine. They have no idea all the different components of it and how they work synergistically together through what's called the entourage effect. So what will happen is, in many different areas of life, right? Like you look at music, right? Did the world ask for music like Jimi Hendrix? Did they ask for music like the Sex Pistols or the Rolling Stones? No. What happened was those artists created music from their heart, and they informed the consumer with what was actually positive and good and what was good quality music, right? But in the cannabis world right now, the consumers are leading the way, and the consumer is uneducated. So the consumer wants high THC, and instead of the growers being like, hey, we're going to re-educate you, right? Try this strain. Whoa, I just got higher than ever. Oh, cool. That's only 12% THC. How the hell did that happen? What's happening is all the growers are going, okay, they want high THC. And so everything is becoming hybridized. Everything is becoming very linear in a way, right? Like my friends and I have a joke that everything these days is gelato, right? If you look back like 2 or 3 steps in the lineage, it's gelato, right? Or Skittles, or Gelato, or Do-si-do, or any of these things.
Just strains. Just
yeah, exactly. Yeah. And so like, again, not that those strains are bad, but like, differentiality and variety is the spice of life. So I think one of the biggest things that people are unaware of is the fact that THC is not all that you need from cannabis, right? It's not the only thing that's intoxicating within the plant. And also that cannabis has actually lost a lot of its psychedelic properties overall since the modern hybridization movement that happened primarily in the 80s, as people were bringing seeds over from Afghanistan and the Middle East and breeding them with a lot of the equatorial sativas that were coming from Mexico and Jamaica and places like that. So one of the things that's happened is now people think that when they go to the store, they just ask for the highest THC and they're going to get the best bang for their buck every time. But here's what THC really is, right? If you have chronic pain, or you're treating cancer with cannabis, or looking to cure your cancer with cannabis, that's an argument for high delta-9 THC. Other than that, delta-9 THC is actually a dissociate. So, if you look at someone like Bob Marley, right? He really emulated cannabis culture, connection, understanding what's important to you, family values, right? Like taking care of your own. That is what cannabis culture at its best is. What a lot of people are doing now, and I talked to Aubrey about this too, when I first introduced Aubrey to my cannabis, right? He was like, oh, I'll try it out. I'm not sure on cannabis, right? And Paul Chek had told me that too. Like, Aubrey's not a big fan of cannabis. And after he had tried mine, he loved it. And he started telling me why he had such a warped view around cannabis. And he's like, dude, every time I see cannabis, it's like I'll be throwing an after party or hanging out with friends, and someone will bring dabs around and they'll dab everyone out, and then everyone's going to bed. And he's like, that's just fucking stupid, right? So he's like, I had this really warped view around cannabis because I thought that's what it did. And that's where a lot of people are at is, yeah, sure, you're getting stupid high, but what are you getting from the experience? Are you connecting with the people next to you and realizing they are you and you are them? Are you realizing how awesome life is and how lucky you are to be alive? Are you realizing you're an infinite being that's always been alive, has never been born, and will never die? And you get to have this experience of, separation from the creator. Like, do you realize any of that when you're just dabbing yourself out? Again, no judgment. I've been there, right? I've done it. But for me, I wasn't getting any of that. And I'll speak to my own personal experience. So I think people are just uneducated around what cannabis is, what the components of it do, and why they want to look for differentiality. Some of my favorite strains, man, are 9 to 10% THC and 9 to 10% CBD. You know why? Because I can hit 3, 4, 5 bags of it and have amazing conversations where I'm getting ideas. I got a whole note section on my phone. And the next day I'm implementing all of that. When I do high THC, sure, maybe I'll have a deep meditative experience. And every once in a while I'll do that, or I have an injury or something like that. When I've helped cancer patients treat and cure their cancer with cannabis, like my father, that was one of the things I utilized was high THC RSO, Rick Simpson oil for short. But again, it's just like, it's kind of like, I hate to bring pharmaceuticals or alcohol into the conversation, but for a lot of people, they can understand it from that perspective. It's like moonshine exists, right? You can get annihilated on moonshine. So if that exists, why are you getting beers when you go to the liquor store? Oh, well, I want to be able to chill around the fire. I don't want to get hammered. People get it with alcohol, right? They don't get it with cannabis yet. And I think that will come with time. I think a lot of people, there's so much misinformation around cannabis. It's ridiculous. But I think that's one of the biggest things. The other thing too is that people are unaware of the nature of the energy of how the medicine was grown and how it was grown. And this is one of the biggest things that is not talked about often. And I think the reason is because it's a qualitative thing. You can't see and measure it with your eyes. And that's really important for people that are stuck in their left brain. So when I speak about the energy of the grower who grew the medicine, people were like, oh, that's woo-woo, right? And I'm like, okay, cool. Let's do an experiment. So you don't believe in that because you can't see and measure, right? Yeah, I have no way to make that tangible. Okay, cool. Do you love someone in your life? Yeah. Do you love two people? Yeah. How many units of love do you have for each one? Oh, well, it's like, okay, but you still know love exists, right? So, I think where human beings are moving into is this idea of, or this realization that not everything around us can be seen with our naked eye. And for anyone who's done psychedelics, you get that, right? But at the end of the day, if we're not able to see these things, it makes it very hard for people that are lacking conscious awareness to understand this. But there's a real reason why in shamanistic cultures, there was the shaman that grew the medicine, no one else, because the shaman would stay separate from the entire tribe, and he or she would make sure that their energy, their limiting beliefs, etc., were not coming up when they were working with the medicine. So for me, right, there's a big part of why I teach how to grow, and I call my course Grow with Cannabis, because the idea is you're not just growing cannabis, you're growing alongside it. And so every single week in that program, we have energy practices to do before you go into your grow room. We have biogeometry that you're harmonizing the energetic space with, because not everyone can grow outdoor, right? I live in a place where I can't grow outdoor all year. Do I want to miss out on being able to grow cannabis just because I have to use lights? No, of course not, right? This is one of the great things about biogeometry. You can mitigate all those EMFs, radio waves, etc., that are negatively influencing the plant's biofield, the same way that it does for us. And the great thing about biogeometry is they do have a lot of studies out there on it, so I can relay those to people. But those are a few of the things that are really leading people astray. They're just looking for high THC and how pretty it is, but they're unaware of, like, did you just walk into a place that looks like the Apple Store? What's the energy of the people that own that place? What's their intention, right? They're just looking to make money more than likely, right? And I'm not saying money's bad. Everyone has a right to make a handsome income for doing something positive. But when you're just taking a plant medicine and you're essentially just reaping the rewards from it and you're trying to grow it as cheap as possible and get it out there, I don't think that's supportive to the planet or to the plant or to the people that you're giving the medicine to.
Yeah, this may sound a little off from left field, but you're going to understand because you get this stuff. So one of the reasons I stopped smoking weed is I literally see demons. I would see demonic entities, dementors around me when I was smoking the weed. And I'm sure that some of it for sure came from my traumatic patterns that was attracting them for sure, but it did seem like a portal towards them. So one, is that somewhat true? Can that be an experience just like any alcohol, drug, or psychedelic experience? So one, why does that happen to some people I've talked to that does happen to them? And how do you mitigate that? How do you not allow the weed to become a portal towards demonic attachments?
Yeah, well, one of the biggest things is making sure that you know who grew your medicine. Because a lot of the times, think about cannabis, especially in a place that is not legal yet. A lot of it is coming from people that are in a very high state of anxiety and paranoia because they're worried about getting caught. Also, depending on what else they're selling, there could be gangbangers or whatever else, right? And that energy really fucks with the plant, because think of it this way, right? We understand this now with meat. If you're someone who's buying meat that's factory farmed, first of all, it's fucking horrible, right? We all know that now. But also they've done research to realize that if those poor animals are stressed their whole life and then they get slaughtered and then you're eating that meat, you're getting uploaded with their stress, their anxiety, and their trauma. And you're taking that into your nervous system. But for some reason, we haven't realized that same thing happens with plants yet, And so that's one of the biggest things is making sure that you're getting your medicine from someone who truly cares about growing the medicine. Do they need to be perfect? No, they don't need to be someone who meditates 5 hours a day or anything. They just need to have a good heart. They just need to be in it for the right reasons. Again, they can make money, they can do whatever, but you don't want it to be someone who's just like, yeah, fuck it. I'm going to do this and make a ton of money. I don't give a fuck about anything. That's when you're going to get a lot of that happening. Now, the other thing that you called out too is that cannabis does act as a mirror, right? Like any plant medicine does. And so a lot of the responsibility that comes with it is being able to understand, like, okay, let's say you did grow your own medicine and that happens, right? Realizing like, okay, this must be things inside of me that the plant is illuminating for me. And all I must do, because again, the negative polarity, negative entities, etc., they run on fear. They can't exist on love, right? It's the opposite energy. It's the antithesis. So all that is required, and again, this isn't necessarily easy in the moment, right? But this is as simple as it is to realize that all you need to do is project as much love to those beings as you possibly can, right? And show them, I'm not afraid of you. You have no power here, right? Because I am coming from a different energetic source, and that is positivity, that is service to others, and that is love. And the only way they can get through to you is if you have fear come up. And even if you have fear come up, you can alchemize that as well, and realizing that, you know what? I took a medicine, the medicine is working, and if this is what I'm getting, this is exactly what I needed. Because one of the biggest ways that people have a challenging experience, and I went through many of these, I've gone through them in different medicines too, is let's say a big challenge arises. I've had experiences with mushrooms where I literally thought I was dying, and we can get into that. Yeah, like I literally thought, what happened was I did an 18-gram tea of penis envy with two of my friends, and we didn't know what we were messing with. This is many years ago. And basically we were watching a funny movie, and I started laughing so hard that it triggered a visceral response that I was choking. The mushrooms had mold on them, and I was having an allergic reaction. My throat was going to close up and I was going to die, right? And it happened like literally like that. And so in that moment, I had to reckon with that, right? And I literally I got completely into that feeling of oh my God, I'm going to die. Then after about 5 minutes of pacing in the bathroom and trying to make myself puke, I realized, oh, I'm not going to die. And then I realized, oh, this was just a fear of me, a fear of death, right? And so being able to move through those things has been very beneficial in my life, because I've realized that, part of life is you're never going to know, what life's going to throw you, right? As Forrest Gump says, life's like a box of chocolates. You don't always know what you're going to get. And so at the end of the day, if you can realize and have that ability to take some deep breaths when you're feeling these things and really love them, then you can transcend them and actually allow them to evolve as well, whether they're an entity, whether they're part of you, whether they're an ancestral pattern that you're now putting an end to. And I think a lot of that's happening for our generation, man, because think about what's happening to the planet right now. It's the Great Awakening, et cetera. And, in order to continue moving forward, we must purify all that karma and all that negativity out of our lineage. And so for a lot of us, many people listening to your show, me and you, Aaron, all these people we hang out with, we may be the first in our lineage that's actually handling all of this stuff. And so I don't say that, again, this is meant to be easy or anything like that, but it's a fucking awesome mission, and I think realizing that, okay, if I'm having a negative experience, right, this must be exactly what I needed, because the mind's going to tell you this shouldn't be happening. I wasn't supposed to have this experience. And that's when the fear can take over. But if you realize, oh, if this is what I'm getting, this is exactly what I needed, and you can contextualize it as happening for you, that immediately makes those things go away in my experience.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no doubt. I'm somewhat getting close to being convinced. I haven't touched weed in years, and it seems like a useful thing. But I want to move more towards your spiritual knowledge. You're dropping little codes here and there that I'm like, this guy knows way beyond just marijuana. You said at one point that you should be grateful to be separated from the creator. I've never heard that perspective. Can you go into that a little bit?
Definitely, man. Yeah. So
usually that's the point of reference for the egoistic suffering. Why am I separated? So why is it actually a cool experience we have to have?
Yeah. So think about it this way, right? Now, people can choose what they want to believe, right? But I believe we're infinite beings. We've never been born. We never die, right? And we're living out this finite experience of separation from the one true creator, right? And so if you think about it, most people that are doing psychedelics, and I'm one of them, right? I'm not dissing or judging anyone, but for a lot of us, we spend a lot of time trying to get back to wherever there is, right? And what I realized in a high deal one time with cannabis was wait a minute, if I'm there forever, but I'm here for 100 years, why am I trying to get there and not living my time here? Yeah. This is actually the gem experience. And when you look into different sacred texts, they talk about how it takes a long time to evolve to the point where you can have a physical incarnation. And so for me, I actually see this as one of the most beautiful experiences ever, because even though we have faith and we have these sacred texts and we have these experiences that show us that we are one with everything, we don't know that objectively. The mind will forget over and over and over again. And we get to remember over and over again. And it's kind of like this. If you've been in a romantic relationship, right? And you've been living with your partner for some time, Well, when you first got together, things were very new, right? And, you know, you would leave them and you'd miss them a lot and you'd go see them again. But after a while, it just gets normalized, right? And you're with them every day, waking up, etc. Well, let's say that they go away for a month, right? They're going out with their girlfriends or boyfriends or whatever, and they're just hanging out, they're going on a retreat or whatever. And now here you are alone again. Well, all of a sudden you start realizing a lot of the subtleties, right? Of what you maybe just never took in for heart, right? Of what they do, right? That kiss they give you in the morning, that way they make your eggs, that way they look at you and ask you like, hey, you done with work yet? You know, like, can we go play? You know, like those kind of things. And so for me, you know, when I'm someone who forgets, right, for a moment, or maybe a day or a month or even a year, right, of, you know, that I'm one with everything and I remember again, oh my God, it's the best feeling ever, man. It's like that feeling of, you know, when you're a kid, right, and maybe you do something you're not supposed to, right? Like maybe you spill a glass of milk, right, on your mom's new carpet or whatever. And you're like, oh God, she's going to kill me. And then she comes out and maybe she's in just a better mood than you thought. And she just starts laughing. She's like, oh, it's just a rug. Who cares? And you remember again, oh my God, everything's love. Everyone loves me. We're all love, right? Like for me, those abilities to forget and then remember again, like you're forgetting everything and then you're remembering everything, right? And for me, that's one of the best highs ever. Like when you have those experiences a lot from psychedelics and also in your typical reality where things like that happen, like synchronicities are like that, you know? Maybe I'm going through my day and I'm kind of just like, man, you know, whatever, I'm falling into a victim thought or something like that. Then all of a sudden something crazy happens, you know? And something that I know is just like, no way that's logical, right? And it just makes me laugh hysterically because I'm once again reminded of, oh my God, yeah, I'm living this thing and I get to play this game and I get to have this meat suit and I get to hang out with awesome people and do these cool things. And then I'll forget again, and then I'll come back. And for me, that's why I'm so grateful for this experience of being separate, you know, because we're not really separate, but there's an illusion we are, right? Because again, in our left brain, in our typical beta brainwave state, you know, and in the world we live in, we're just getting back to the global population starting to actually want something greater, you know, than just the cars and the houses and things like that. And that's also good, you know, like I see this all as perfectly playing out divinely. Even the negative influences on our life, right? The Klaus Schwabs or the Bill Gates, right? I'm grateful for them because if it weren't for them, how would we know how to positively polarize? You know, would Luke Skywalker have ever been Luke Skywalker without Darth Vader? You know, he needed Darth Vader as much as
internally as well. Like
exactly.
We need the internal reflection of the negative polarity internally too.
Exactly, and that's what the ego is all about. Yeah. You know, like the ego is actually our best friend. You know, and this is what I talk about often. Think of the ego as the operating system to our computer. But just like when we're kids and maybe we're doing dumb things on the computer, like looking at porn or whatever, and all of a sudden we end up with a bunch of viruses and we had no idea that happened. So now we're trying to go on AOL or whatever we did as kids, and it's just like, Mom, the computer's not working. We have no idea why, right? We're completely oblivious. As we get older, we start realizing like, oh, you got to be careful what sites you go to. You got to be careful what pop-ups you click on, right? So that's like the analogy of how like when we start to grow as adults, right, as human beings, we start to figure out meditation, we start to figure out breath work, etc. And now that same thing that started to cock block us, right, and actually like prohibit us from feeling the magic can actually be wielded into our best friend, right? That allows us to have this unique personality, right? And these things, and also allows us to connect with other human beings because, you know, if I was sitting here and saying, I'm enlightened, I haven't had a negative thought in years, well, how the fuck would anyone relate to me? You know, they'd be like, oh, this guy, I guess, just like doesn't have any of the things I do. That's why I love talking about the fact that I love thinking in my ego as my best friend. Doesn't mean that sometimes I don't get stuck in a challenging situation with it or whatever, but I wouldn't change it for anything because that's human. You know, that's what it means to be human. And I love this experience, you know, it's just so beautiful. And, you know, for me, like being able to have these times where you remember and you forget, and we're all walking each other home, we're all reflections of each other. What a cool fucking game, dude. You know, like, I mean, props to the creator for creating such an amazing virtual reality game. You know, it's just so cool.
Well, never heard that perspective. Beyond cannabis, what are some methods you use to return to oneness when you feel separate? Like, give me some examples of typical things. I think we each have like a vehicle in our consciousness that makes us feel separate, right? Mine's unworthiness. Like I'll suddenly feel unworthy of love, friendship, of anything I'm doing. That's my thing. How do you return to wholeness for your like kryptonites in your own psyche?
Yeah, dude, this is another great question, man. So one of the best things that I found, and the first couple of things are going to be basic, right? Like everyone says these things, but meditation daily, never miss it. The reason is because it's the number one thing my brain tells me in the morning, like, dude, you don't need to do that. You feel great, right? And I've fallen into that trap so many times. It's such a thirst trap, man. Because you will. Maybe you'll feel great that day. But then a couple of days later, you'll forget how important meditating is. And all of a sudden, you'll be stuck in stinking thinking and all these different, negative thought loops and things like that. So meditation, super important, right? It's one of those things that I tell everyone, like, you might not think it's doing anything until you stop for 3 days and you'll be like, wow, that was doing a lot, right?
Yep.
So no matter what, just meditate for 20 minutes minimum in the morning. That's like my best advice. Second is breath work. Breath work is one of the best ways to access our own psychedelics, our endogenous psychedelics.
I've tripped harder on breath work than anything.
Oh my God, me and Aaron were doing cosmic whippets last night is what we call them,
Hey.
which are just short rounds of breath work. And we're not doing any whippets or anything like that, but we call them a cosmic whippet because for me, when you like rip 10 breaths and you pop, lock, and squeeze it, you'll just get shot off, right, on your own DMT and then come back. And cannabis, of course, increases that because cannabis produces melatonin in the brain. And melatonin is a precursor to that endogenous DMT. So meditation and breath work are like the basics, right? They're my foundation. On top of that, one of the new things that I've been integrating, and I've always done affirmations and things like that, but one of the newest things that I highly recommend anyone listening, if this resonates with you, take it and utilize it, is called the Affirmation Contemplation Awareness Practice. So what this is writing out 10 affirmations in the past tense, third person, right? So it would be like, Ryan wakes up feeling healthy, rested, and full of magnetizing power each day. Ryan makes this much per month, right? Things like that, whatever you want them to be. You write out 10 like that because you want to be programming yourself with, Ryan is not me, right? I get to experience Ryan, but who I really am is the observer of Ryan, right? That's also imbued into his experience. So in these affirmations, you want to be using language that pattern interrupts yourself into realizing you're not who you think you are, right? At the same time, you don't want to say, I'm going to have that, because that's thinking that when you think about quantum physics, right? Anything we want is already manifest. We just need to switch the timeline if we're not getting what we want. So you always want to say things in past tense, right? Like it's already happened. So you'll write out 10 of those affirmations. You'll then record them on like a voice memo on your iPhone or something. And then what you'll do is when you wake up in the morning and right before you go to bed at night, you'll play them to yourself, right? While you're laying in bed. The reason for that is because in the morning and in the nighttime, you're going to be getting into alpha waves. And alpha and theta waves, like we talked about, right, are where your subconscious starts to become more open and more available to you. And those things actually get lodged in there much easier. The next thing you want to do is every night before you go to bed, you want to positively confirm your own bias, right? So we know about confirmation bias. Well, it's not necessarily a bad thing, right? It's just how you choose to wield it. So what we do is we actually positively confirm our own bias. So we look at the affirmations, right? Like Ryan woke up feeling rested and healthy. Well, I might write there like, wow, I did wake up feeling really good today, right? My next affirmation, Ryan makes this much per month. I visualized having all the abundance in the world, right? You can always find evidence for any of these, right? That's what confirmation bias is all about, right? It's like whatever you choose to believe, you'll find evidence for. So when you start doing this for yourself every single night, writing out a confirmation for each one of these affirmations, listening to them before you go to bed, when you wake up in the morning. And then the last thing is every single hour you are awake, have an alarm on your phone that goes off. When it goes off, you're going to close your eyes and you're going to silently repeat to yourself with your own name, of course, Ryan is not his thoughts. Ryan is not his emotions. Ryan is not his experience. Ryan is a fractal of the infinite awareness stemming from the creator. Then what you're going to do is you're going to see yourself in the third person, like you're observing. You're going to look around the environment. You're going to see everything. Then you're going to try to zoom out as far as you can, right? While still keeping the focus on yourself, right? And then what you're going to do is you're going to tune into the visualization and the feeling attached to all those affirmations. And that has been one of the best practices I've ever gotten into. You know, I've been getting a lot into decentralized finance and the sovereignty space and all of that. And you want to talk about fear in the nervous system? Yeah, talking about not paying taxes, lawfully, of course, right? Not just skating them, but getting around these things that are very deep in the nervous system, realizing that money isn't even real, realizing that, you know, we're not even using money, we're using debt notes to pay debt, right? Yep. And all that kind of stuff that Brandon Jill Williams talks about. You know, these affirmations and that practice has been monumental in me being able to make fucking huge strides very quickly in my belief systems around that. Now, the other things I'll do are, you know, things like taking a walk with my dog, right? I have a little French bulldog named Pierre. He's fucking adorable. We call him the Brad Pitt of Frenchies because he's so goddamn handsome.
My family has one. I grew up with one.
Oh,
Bulldog,
dude,
yeah, best dogs.
they're so fucking funny, dude. Like, and like when he looks at me, it's pure God. Like he's looking at me and it's just pure God, man. And just, it pattern interests me every time. Animals are amazing at doing that, you know? And I really think that's why dogs are a man's best friend, you know, because they just remind you immediately of like your own power when they look at you. And so Rachel and I will take Pierre for a walk, you know, we'll joke around, we'll make, you know, we'll pretend we're him talking, you know, like, Mom, I hate doing this, or Mom, drag me through the grass, you know, and things like that. And just be silly. You know, laughter is the best alchemizing medicine out there. And I think that, like I touched on earlier, we have an issue with seriousness in humanity. And I have one of these issues too. Sometimes I realize I'm taking myself way too fucking seriously. And typically if I fall into a challenge, it's because I'm taking myself too seriously. It's because I'm wondering like, what will other people think of this, right? And things that really don't matter. Because like we talked about before we hit record, I think like, you know, I used to have a lot of fear around being seen because I was worried about what people would think of me. But what I realized, another idea from cannabis, was like, wait a minute, let's say I go on a podcast and I royally fuck up, right? I just completely foobar the whole thing. Well, the people that really love me will still love me. And if anyone that said they love me then judges me, they weren't my people. And I got them out of the way and that's okay. No judgment, right? Just discernment wise, like, thank you for showing me your real colors so I could spend more time with the people that matter to me. You know, so again, at the end of the day, just realizing like your own patterns you have, right? And how you thirst trap yourself from remembering the true power you have. You know, for me, those are the things that I'll do. Mountain biking is another big one. Getting into nature and just ripping the trails. That's a good one. Going to the beach, you know, right where the sand meets the water. Ibrahim Karim, who founded biogeometry, has tested and shown that that's a huge BG3 spot. Now, BG3 we won't get super into it. Basically, it's 3 bands of energy that are at the center point of everything. So another way to say that is it's the energy of God, right? Because God's at the center of everything, right? Everything comes from the center and goes out, right? So, you know, things like that where you're in nature, you're at the beach, you're doing what you love, you're around the people you love, right? You're reminding yourself of your own power. You're taking time in silence, right? And like Paul Chek says, you know, and some of what I've already said falls into these categories, but you're using the 4 doctor system. Doctor diet, what are you putting in your body, right? Because you are what you eat and you are what you ate, right, as well. And then Doctor quiet, are you giving yourself time each day in solitude, right, to kind of make sense of all this shit going on inside of you and make sure you know who you really are? Doctor movement, are you moving your body every day? Doesn't need to be weight training, it could be taking a walk, mountain biking, whatever. And then Doctor happy. And this is the one I feel like a lot of people miss out on. Are you really doing things that make you happy each and every day? You know, because at the end of the day, I know that I've fallen into a lot of those thirst traps of like, well, you know, I'll do this thing. I don't really want to do it, but eventually I'll do this other thing that can make me happy. No, that's just complete lie. It's like retirement, right? Like, oh, you'll work for 50 years and then you'll retire, right? Complete bullshit. You know, at the end of the day, you want to remind yourself all the time that you are royalty, that everything is God, that everything is royalty, that the person you meet in the street is just you living a different life. They demand respect. If they overstep a boundary, you need to put a boundary up, but you don't need to hate them. You don't need to give them, you know, any of that negative energy. And at the end of the day, the more that you can just remind yourself of those things, which again is why meditation is so important to catch these things, the more that you will start living in a totally different reality. And it doesn't mean that you don't have those belief systems pop up, but they pop up over there now instead of here, you know, like you have space from them and you can love them. You can be like, wow, that's wild that you learned that in order to get ahead in life or be successful, that you had to shit talk yourself. Let me now re-educate you, you know, because maybe my parents taught me that, maybe society taught me that, but that's not what I choose to believe. That's not my reality that I want to live in, you know? So those are a couple of things I do to kind of get myself back to my own point of awareness when I fall into certain challenges in life and things like that.
Yeah, I'm going to end with this question, just selfishly for myself. I've gone on a journey of kind of debating the efficacy and morality within manifestation. And the practice you mentioned of like, you know, Ryan did these things, it resonates to me, but it's like I thought of manifestation, at what point is it the right thing to do? And at what point is it an egoistic need to bypass God's plan? You know what I'm saying? Like, what's that line? How have you managed, so you feel your energy, I feel your very high frequency, all these things, and you just know dark demonic sides to you. I can sense that. And so how do you use manifestation that way to not become the darkness of it, to not bypass God's intention, to not treat it as a way of like, I know what's best for me? Definitely. How do you go about that?
Definitely. So this is a really good question. You asked really good questions, man. And this is something that I love to dive into. So here's the thing, right? I know that I don't know anything. Like, wise is the man who knows he does not know. And I'll say a little bit on this first before I dive into the other part. The idea that we know anything is a thirst trap, right? When we're kids, we're the happiest.
What do you mean by thirst trap?
Yeah, so thirst trap, like things that will take your attention, right? Like a thirst trap, an example of a thirst trap is like a very attractive person
on Instagram,
that doesn't have like, you know, any good intentions for you, but you get mystified because they're so attractive. And then before you know it, you're like, oh God, I'm in a really challenging spot here, right? So these things exist all throughout our life, right? And one of the things is knowledge. Because at the end of the day, if we understand quantum physics, we understand that we don't live in an objective universe, right? Nothing is objective here. The blue you see is not the blue I see, right? The person you like is not necessarily the person I like, right? Everything is subjective. And so at the end of the day, how many people are online trying to prove their point to someone else, right? Metal music's better than rap, or Democrats or Republicans, when in reality, it's neither or. It's just, it doesn't work for you? Cool, right? That's all that you really need to do. The fact that people have to go out there and try to prove themselves to other people shows they don't really believe what they're saying, right? But they've been indoctrinated to think that they need to pick a team or pick a side, etc. So they're going out there and trying to say, please believe me, this is why your thing's shit and my thing's this, right? So if we take that concept, right, of realizing that we don't know anything and that the point of being here is not to know anything, right? Kids are the happiest and they don't know anything and they're happy to be there because the mystery is the best part of life. And that's why I think psychedelics are so powerful too, because what do they show people? Holy shit, that was a lot of things I'll never be able to grasp fully, but I experienced it, right? I know it exists, but I don't know what the hell to call it. You know, think about it this way. You know, think about Christmas morning or insert holiday or birthday here. What was the best part of it? Was it playing with your gifts? Was it opening them? No, it was coming down in the morning, seeing them all there, and having to wait to open them and not knowing what you got, right? And so how we do anything is how we do everything. If that was the most fun on Christmas morning, why would it not be fun throughout all life, right? Why are first dates so fun? Because you don't know the possibilities. This could be your future, you know, partner, right? The person you get married to, or it could just be something that you guys become great friends or whatever. You have no idea, right? And so that's the actual, like, if people want to enjoy life more, they need more mystery. So how this all applies to what you asked is that I know that maybe what I'm talking about or looking to manifest is what's best for me. Maybe it's not also. And the same way that I was talking about with cannabis, make the intention, right? Show the plant what you're working towards, but then allow the plant to be like, I think I can actually give you something better. Because the answer from God is always yes, and it's always better than you could imagine. So for me, right, I might say that Ryan wakes up feeling rested and healthy every day, and I start waking up feeling very inspired every day. And I'm like, holy shit, that's what I really needed. But I still am aware of how I'm waking up because I put a focus on it. And so for me, I'm more cooking than baking when it comes to my manifestations, right? I don't need them to be exactly what I want. I just know that maybe I'm looking for more abundance in my life to be able to give back more to the world. And maybe I have a certain figure on that of how much I want to make per month. But maybe God says, you know what? Maybe you need this instead, right? But it's still some form of abundance. I'm like, okay, cool, right? And I just shift my intention to be that instead. And so if we can allow ourselves to be in that ability to focus on what we want, but not get too attached to it, because attachment is a disease too, then we find the perfect juxtaposition to allow magic to occur, is what I found.
Yeah, it's kind of like the analogy I can think of now is, you heard of sushi omakase?
Yeah.
Just basically like you want sushi and you get hey chef, give me whatever you think is best for you, and then you're just like, it's still good sushi. So I think it's the same thing, but
exactly. And that involves the mystery.
Yeah.
You know, you don't know what you're going to get, which makes it fun.
Yeah, I expected to learn a lot about cannabis, but I didn't. I learned even more so just from your spiritual knowledge. So thank you so much for coming on and sharing all your wisdom and your knowledge around cannabis, also life. You know, I appreciate it. And where can people find you and, you know, work with your courses or stuff to develop that relationship with cannabis? Yeah,
Lucas, has been a blast, man. Thank you so much for having me on, dude. And for anyone who's looking to hit me up, I love talking if you guys haven't been able to notice yet, so feel free to reach out. But at the real Ryan Sprague on Instagram, I spend the most time on there out of any platform. I don't spend too much on there. I try to post and ghost, but I am on there every day in my DMs. My last name is Sprague. That's how you spell it, so the rest you should be able to know how to spell. But on there you can find our first like kind of point of entry for anyone if they want to kind of grade where they're at in their relationship with cannabis is the Conscious Cannabis Quiz. It's free. I'll make sure to give it to you for the show notes. And then from there, we have a series of different courses, right? You can purchase the Clarity with Cannabis course on its own. It's a 4-week course. Break your addiction to cannabis in 30 days without having to quit, because it's not about cannabis. You're not addicted to cannabis. You're addicted to the feelings of discomfort stemming from traumas within you that are maybe unconscious to you. Then we have the Grow with Cannabis course for anyone looking to not only learn how to grow cannabis and not only looking how to grow alongside your cannabis plant, but learn one of the most beautiful and important skills you can learn as a human being, which is how to work with the tide of the earth, right? Not how to control it, not how to take from it, but how to tap into the abundance that's already there, right? Create your own living soil. Take the plants and different microbes around you and create ferments and your own indigenous microorganisms through Korean natural farming, and apply biogeometry to your own life, to the lives of your plants, to your family's lives, so that you can miss out on a lot of that static that comes with all of that technology we have now, right? Which again, technology is fantastic, but again, it can be damaging. So we just got to be responsible with the things and how we utilize it. And then from there, we have kind of the full course is the Conscious Cannabis Collective, where that has all of our courses in it. We do weekly calls. That's where I'm coaching people on all the things we talked about today. And like I said earlier, you know, even though it's called the Conscious Cannabis Collective, and we teach a lot about cannabis in there, like you saw in this conversation, it's a lot deeper than cannabis, because again, if someone's going to cannabis, they're curious, whether they realize it or not, about much deeper things about their soul, their heart, you know, their purpose in life, etc. And so that's what we do. And then if someone is like, you know, I don't know, I'm hearing this kid and he says psychedelic cannabis, I don't know if I buy that. I've smoked weed for a long time and I don't think it's a psychedelic. Well, hey, you can believe whatever you want. And like I said in the beginning, don't believe anything I say. We have a workshop called Breathe with Cannabis. You can come out to that. It's $55. We do it once a month, me, Aaron, and Chris. And you can see for yourself if cannabis is a psychedelic. It's a 2.5-hour live ceremonial experience. And so tap in there, tap into the community. The biggest thing I'm looking to do, and my greatest strength, in my opinion, is being a connector and being able to bring people into really fun experiences in life, you know? And so anyone who's looking to reach out, that's where you can find me.
I hope you enjoyed that video. If you want to watch more content, please click this video right here and don't forget to subscribe right here. Thank you.